Good morning.
Good morning.
And welcome to the third session of the Lenten Learnings, and also welcome to our guests online. Thank you very much for attending today. And I'm so glad to see our participants back with us today. The Venerable Gawa Khandro from the Gawaling Buddhist Center, the Very Reverend Dr. Kyle Norman from St. Paul's Cathedral, Rabbi Dr. Marcy Gofsky representing the Jewish faith, Reverend Patricia Davies from Spiritual Connections, Mr. Ahmed Kafafi from the Islamic Association. Following the presentations, there will be refreshments available just behind the altar here, and we call that our chapter room. It is our opportunity to meet with the speakers and ask any questions that you may have. The restroom facilities are through this archway to my left and then to the right. The purpose of the Lenten Lectures experience is to foster understanding between faith groups. Our wish is that these experiences will model a way forward where we can respect the uniqueness of each other's faith while still maintaining our own voice. I just have a personal story here. One of my first experiences with St. Paul's was what we called then the Lenten Lectures, which is our Lenten Learnings. And it was when I came into this church and I saw that all these denominations had gathered together under the roof of St. Paul's and were learning from each other and showing respect for each other, that made me want to be part of St. Paul's community. Our first Lenten learning was who or what is God. Our second experience was what are your scriptures or holy texts? And today the presentations are what is wrong with the world today? Each speaker will get 12 minutes to address the topic of the day. A gong will ring when there are 2 minutes left. We ask each speaker to respect the time allotment so that we can get through all the speakers within the hour. What is wrong with the world today? The Venerable Gawa Khandro from the Gawaling Buddhist Center. What is wrong with the world today?
Good morning. This is going to be interesting because I have a one-word answer. And I'm pretty sure you can guess what it is. Oh, sorry. I have a one-word answer. Nothing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the world. However, it's what we think and how we behave. It's not what scriptures we can quote. And it's not how many times you can genuflect or how many malas you can do in 10 minutes. That's got nothing to do with anything. Those are ceremonial gestures, and they don't contribute anything other than reminding us what we're supposed to do. The problems come from the way we think and from twisted thinking that guides us in unfortunate directions. The world is fine. If you go out that door and look up at the sky, or listen to a bird, or look at a tree, hold a puppy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of it. But if it's the wrong kind of tree, or it sheds leaves and you hate raking, or if there's clouds and you wanted a picnic, do you see what happens? It's the way we think that contaminates the world, and then the behaviors that come out of that kind of thinking. So I don't know what to say for the next 11 3/4 minutes because I don't think there's anything wrong with the world. And there's nothing wrong with us, except that we have to retrain our thinking. Now, it's been proven by science that we can rewire the brain. People who have had catastrophic strokes can relearn how to do things. The brain can be trained and rewired. In Buddhism, there are what we call the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed is easy to understand on a surface level. I want more. Well, I have an iPhone, but I want the new one. I have a car, but it's 7 years old. I want a raise. I think I've earned it. I want to be young. Good luck with that one. But we have these ways of thinking about the world and our lives. And greed isn't just about wanting more possessions. It's not about wanting more riches, more RSPs, more money in the bank, more holidays, more status, more power. No, that's the surface stuff. Wanting to have more of someone else's time than they've offered. Wanting to have an extra helping at a buffet when you realize there are still people lined up who haven't had anything yet. Greed is very, very subtle. Now, that doesn't mean we have to pick our lives apart and constantly find fault. That's not what Buddhism says at all. What it says is when you notice these things, that's your first victory. Because until we notice, we can't change anything. But as soon as we notice, it's like, oh, right. Okay, there's lots of people lined up at the buffet. I'll wait. I don't really need more food. I'd like to have it, but I don't need it. So approaching things like the poison of greed is an invitation in Buddhism to unpack what that actually is. Look a little deeper. Take the layers off the onion and see, is there a deeper meaning to greed? And hatred, the second of the poisons, isn't just wanting to kill somebody or hit somebody or sue somebody or discriminate and leave someone outside the circle. That's the surface meaning. Hatred in subtler ways. It's like, well, all right, but they're not really welcome. Well, he's part of our group, but I don't like the way he talks. Well, those guys, they can't join the country club. They haven't really got enough money or status. Hatred comes in subtle packages too. So we have to watch out for that and just, when we catch it, correct it. Now, delusion is the tough one. Delusion it doesn't just mean you're a bit cuckoo. It doesn't just mean you have a shaky grasp on what we call reality. I don't suppose you'll remember, but when I was talking about the Eightfold Path, one of the steps is right view, or wise view, the most fundamental and important of the 8, I believe. Because that means we most of the time have an unskillful or unwise view of the world. We think, well, that person's been there for, like the Queen, she's been there for 70 years. She'll be there forever. And sadly, she's not. We think that because we build an expensive house, that house will last forever. One firestorm will correct your thinking. I love my dog. He's my best pal. He'll always be my best pal. Well, he's going to die. Things change all the time. And we were just talking about changing careers, changing focus, changing ideas, changing what we want to do, changing where we go and how we live. Nothing's permanent. Nothing stays the same. But we think it does. And when it doesn't follow through, we get ticked off. We get disappointed and frustrated. So delusion is just thinking that isn't in alignment with what's really true. Those are the three poisons, kind of in a nutshell. And that's what's wrong with the world. That we, not the world, that we function with the three poisons, not on a gross level, usually. Most of us aren't killers and acquisitive and greedy and hateful. But in small, subtle ways, that kind of thinking creeps in. It just sits there and it waits for when we're frustrated or disappointed, or we feel fearful. Fear is the greatest motivator of all for humans. So when we can change the way we think, we can see the world differently, and instead of thinking, what can I get? I want more of that. And I don't like them, so I want them out of the club. Instead of thinking that way, what's needed here? What can I offer? Well, the very best I can do right now is to not cause harm. So whatever's going on in the world that we think is something wrong with the world, if we all stop doing harm in gross and subtle ways, it will be obvious that there's nothing wrong with the world. And then we will blush and stumble and feel a little bit embarrassed that it was us all along. No harm, no foul. It's not that we then go around feeling guilty because we've done things that were unskillful or unkind. The point is to notice that that's not who we want to be. And step by step, try again today. One of my teachers, Gelong Tupten, offered that as a teaching, that when we get up in the morning, we think, oh gosh, I did something yesterday that I regret, it wasn't skillful, or, oh, I was angry at so-and-so. Wake up and think, try again today. Try again today. And every day just keep realigning your intention with your good heart. And if they're lined up, you'll be fine. You'll be doing the best you can. And that's all any of us can do. That's it. There's nothing wrong with the world. There's nothing wrong with us. We just need to fine-tune the way we behave in the world. Thank you for being here. Have a lovely day.
What is wrong with the world today? The very Reverend Dr. Kyle Norman from St. Paul's Cathedral. What is wrong with the world today?
Well, I want to say how much I've enjoyed listening to our panelists over the last couple of weeks, sharing our ideas together, and hearing about how each of us tackle these questions. I also want to mention how hard I found this topic, because it was hard to talk about what's wrong with the world without mentioning the solution. As spiritual people and as people involved in ministry, sorry, we're not allowed to, exactly. As people involved in ministry, it's our job to tell people the solution. We'll get there next week. Today's question, what's wrong with the world, is probably one of the deepest questions that we can ask. And in fact, we ask it in a variety of different ways. We might say, what's wrong with the world? Or we might ask, why do bad things happen to good people? Or we might just utter the most visceral and gut-wrenching question of all, why? All spiritualities, I think, in some way attempt to address this question. Christian faith has often answered this question by pointing to three things that interfere with our life with God and lies at the heart of what's wrong with this world. Historically, these things have always been referred to as the world, the flesh, and the devil. In fact, when we do baptisms in this church, the baptismal family makes three renunciations. Do you renounce Satan and all the spiritual forces that rebel against God? That's the devil. Do you renounce the evil powers of this world, which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God, which is the world? And do you renounce the sinful desires that draw you from the love of God, which is the flesh? So this morning I want to take a look at those three things in that order. Firstly, the devil. Now, the first thing when we think about the devil, we need to cast from our minds the image of horns and a tail and a pitchfork. That is more about horror movies and Dante's Inferno than it is with Scripture. But the Bible does talk about a spiritual force that actively works to destroy God's good creation and thwart our relationship with God. Typically, the snake in the Garden of Eden, in the Christian understanding, is seen as this being. Satan shows up in other books as well. Now, Satan, which simply means accuser or adversary, is that which stands in opposition to all that God does. Now, I don't want to get into the mythology of Satan being this fallen angel and all of that, but I do want to highlight that what we see in Scripture is this spiritual force tempting people, or even working through people. Jesus often dealt with what's called unclean spirits. And yes, there is an acceptance in biblical scholarship that some of which we might have, or that they might have termed evil spirits back then, we would see probably more in line with mental illness or maybe epilepsy. But the New Testament and all of the Bible seems to make clear that there is this spiritual reality, that there is, in some sense, a personification of evil. So the book of 1 Peter talks about how the devil prowls around us. Paul writes about how we should not give the devil a foothold in our life to draw us away from who God is and from the love of Jesus. So the Bible talks about this spiritual world, which impacts and influences the world in which we live, and provides a certain spiritual threat to us. And I think if we are going to accept a truth about angels, miracles, blessings, and resurrections, then we also have to address what the Bible calls unclean spirits, demons, and devils, the spiritual force that works against us. Now, I could have easily stood up and said, well, the answer is sin, and we'll get to the sin thing later on. But sin is a large word. And on one hand, yes, it speaks to our actions, that which we do or don't do that God doesn't like. But in other places, the Bible talks about sin as a spiritual force that dominates us. So you can think about sin as a symptom, our actions, and sin as a disease, this spiritual force of evil in this world. So Paul says, I don't understand what I do. What I want to do, I don't do. And what I don't want to do, that I keep on doing. And then he says, if I do all this stuff, it's not me who does it, it's sin that lives in me. Now, we need to make sure that we don't put too much emphasis on the devil. This isn't about looking for a demon behind every rock and a devil behind every single misfortune. But the devil and this spiritual world is part of the biblical cosmology, the biblical understanding of the world that we live. So let's move on to the second one, the world. The world is not the same as creation. We know from Genesis that God created the world, and after every step, God looked at what was made and saw that it was good. There is an inherent and God-given beauty to the world in which we live, which is why we should care about things like the environment, like justice, and the people around us. But at a deep fundamental level, there is also a certain disorder to this world. I think we would all agree that the world around us is not the paradise that God has created. Fires ravage farmlands, hurricanes destroy entire communities, and disease spread indiscriminately. And this shows at the basic level that there is this disharmony in creation. So the Bible talks about how the entire earth groans in longing for its own redemption. So sin, which is a spiritual force that we go back to Adam and Eve, it doesn't just infect humanity, turning them away from God, but the entire creation, in some sense, has a certain disharmony to it. Christians sometimes use the phrase that we are to be in the world, but not of the world. This is based on Jesus talking about how the disciples are called out of the world. And he says, if the world hated me, it will hate you too. The world represents a way of living where God's presence and the blessings that God provides are constantly pushed off to the side in favor of earthly delights or gain. So Jesus says, what good is it for you to gain the whole world but forfeit your soul? But that's often what we are asked to do. This is what we see. Have you ever wondered why so many of the Hollywood elite, after attaining what the world says is of ultimate value, fame, fortune, and accolades, are some of the most profoundly miserable people in the world? Because what the world says that we should pursue is often contrary to the deep spiritual blessings of God. Because what does the world say? The world says what goes around comes around, and you get what you deserve. Well, in the midst of it, a message of grace makes no worldly sense. The world says, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. And in that world, the message of boundless forgiveness seems illogical and naive. So theologically, the world is a term that refers to the disorder of creation, a disorder that will one day be healed and redeemed. This is why the understanding of redemption in the Christian world isn't just me and my friends sitting in a cloud in the great by and by. No, it is a recreation of all of heaven and all of earth. Now, where do we fit in? On to the last category, the flesh. G.K. Chesterton, who was a famous essayist, novelist, and a devout Christian, responded to an essay competition in the London Times. The Times asked people to answer the question, what is wrong with the world? And Chesterton famously wrote, Dear Sir, I am. Sincerely, G.K. Chesterton. We have gone through talking about the disordered spiritual power and the disordered spiritual world. Well, the fact is that we ourselves bear that disorder within ourselves. Again, we're talking about sin. To be blunt, I am a sinner. To be more blunt, so are you. And that sin creates an opposition between us and God. Now, let's be clear. Being a sinner does not mean that we are vile wretches who now live under the eternal disdain of God. That's not what it means. It does not mean that we are worthless, horrible people. But it does not mean that we are not the people who are beloved by God. What sin means is that deep within myself, I have an inability to live my spiritual life perfectly. And it's not because the spiritual life is too hard or too ill-defined. No, it's because I often push it away. So the Bible says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This is what we have within ourselves. Now, sometimes people say things like, I'm a good person. And I'm sure that's true. But when we say that, we usually mean something like, well, I'm not as bad as that person. And we point to some despot or murderer or tyrant. But what if the tyrant isn't the standard of our morality or our spiritual purity? What if it's not just beating out the worst person? What if it's the other way around? What if the standard is about being as prayerful as Mother Teresa or as peace-filled as the Dalai Lama? See, because if we can point to someone and say, well, I'm not as bad as them, we can also point to someone and say, but I'm not also as good as them. And so where do we stand in the light of God? Sin twists that which is good because it places us at the center of our lives. And that works out in all sorts of ways: racism, sexism, oppression, and violence. It means that we take the good things like scientific advancements and make the atomic bomb. It means we take the blessing of food and water and see them as resources to be hoarded instead of shared. So all of these things work together and to create a dynamic problem, which is the fact that no matter how hard I try, I can never save myself. I can never be the solution to all of this. I can never perfectly live out my spiritual life in the way that I need. I can't give enough money away that will merit me purchasing my way into heaven. I can't pray enough prayers to earn my spot in God's good graces. And no matter how hard I try, I can never think my way into salvation. I can never manifest redemption into my life. Because all of that is fundamentally beyond me. But because it's beyond me, it also means that the solution to the problem is something that I can't do myself. And we'll get there next week. Thank you very much.
What is wrong with the world today? Dr. Marcy Goski, Rabbi of the Jewish faith. What is wrong with the world today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think I'm going to end up leaving you with more questions than an answer to that very big question. And I think we've all approached the topic similarly but differently. I'm going a little bit backwards. Love and kindness save the world. The world's continued existence rests on 3 pillars: study, Bible study, Torah study, book study, worship of God, the divine or other, and acts of loving kindness. The world continues to rest on these pillars: study, worship, and loving kindness. Each of these pillars honors the legacy of a biblical hero when we're looking through biblical terms. Moshe channeled the Torah. Aaron implemented formal ritual of worship, which many of us embrace to get to our spirituality, the ritualistic part of a service, the ritual of a daily activity. And Abraham passed on a legacy of loving kindness. The Talmud names some of the female disciplines: Beruiah, the scholar; Martha, the mother of high priests; Ima Shalom, always rushing to feed the hungry and give hope to the oppressed. The Torah establishes loving kindness as Abraham's legacy. Abraham instructs Eliezer to travel to Abraham's hometown, seek out his family, and bring home a cousin for his young son Yitzhak to marry. But Abraham offers no information on the qualities he wishes for a daughter-in-law. So Eliezer decides, God, he prays, I will know you have acted with loving kindness towards Abraham if, upon my arrival, you send a young woman who offers water to me and to my camels. Rivka appears, pouring out loving kindness like water. And he recognizes in her actions a divine quality that he had prayed for. So recently, I also spoke and attended an interfaith forum on love. Speakers represented 10 faith traditions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Indigenous, Baha'i, Sikhism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, and Scientology. And we all spoke on facets of love, ranging from eros to compassion, from family kinship to support of the oppressed. One of the participants challenged us, all 10 of us. If love in all of its forms is so important to saving the world, so important to our traditions, how come the world is in war all of the time? And why is there so much violence? Together, all 10 of us offered the same single answer. Wherever you find catastrophes, wherever you find war, wherever you find violence, you equally and also find acts of compassion, resistance, relief, support, kindness, and great risk. These actions do not dominate the news, but their power saves the world. Netzach, Endurance, Yeresod, Foundation, Netzach Shabbat Yesod, Enduring Foundation. Does history repeat itself? I don't think so. I think we say that history repeats itself. How many have said, here we go again, we've learned nothing, we're repeating the mistakes of the past? Perhaps it's more like a rhyme. So the present isn't exactly like the past, but it does hold a few echoes. A few things sound alike. So just reminders that the enlightenment, that prayer, that loving kindness, that sweetness, that goodness can come on the other side of things. And if we're looking only at what's wrong with the world and not what's right with the world, it's a disservice to our hearts, to our souls, to our relationships with others, and our relationship with God. I wonder, where did all our knowledge go? We're not in dark ages. We're in uncharted, wonderful, amazing ages. Next time you're outside, at the park or at the beach, look at the water in front of you at the lake. Really look at it. Look at the sky. Really, really look at the sky. Look at the clouds. They're not the same as they will be in a nanosecond, and they're not the same as they were a nanosecond ago. Really, really look into each other's eyes. Look into the faces that you see here and on the street and in the mall and wherever you may go. Really look at the world. The world's okay because we have loving kindness. Thank you. Shalom.
What is wrong with the world today? Reverend Patricia Davies from Spiritual Connections. What is wrong with the world today?
I find it interesting that there's a tendency for most of us to lean towards seeing what is wrong in the world rather than focusing on all of the things that are right in the world. In Science of Mind, Centers for Spiritual Living, our mission is to provide spiritual tools for personal and global transformation. And our purpose is to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence. As I believe I mentioned before, Ernest Holmes, the founder, initially wanted the organization to be a teaching organization rather than a religion, but he was encouraged by his colleagues to establish the Church of Religious Science in order to share his knowledge and wisdom. In studying the science of mind, there we go, we begin to instill into our mind that universal mind is all there is, that there is no equal or opposing power. We experience good and evil because we perceive a presence of duality rather than unity. The self-disciplined, God-centered mind looks for the good in the midst of trouble and is therefore prepared to act when opportunity presents itself. I want to share with you a story from the Taoist teachings, and it goes something like this. A farmer gets a horse, which soon runs away. A neighbor says, "That is bad news." The farmer replies, "Good news, bad news, who can say?" The horse comes back and brings another horse with him. "Good news, you might say." The farmer gives the second horse to his son, who rides it and is thrown and badly breaks his leg. "So sorry for your bad news," says the neighbor. "Good news, bad news, who can say?" the farmer replies. In a week or so, the emperor's men come and take every able-bodied young man to fight in the war. The farmer's son is spared. Good news, of course. It's easy to understand why this ancient story resonates now. It seems in times that seem so full of bad news. The farmer's tale reminds us it is best not to get upset or attached to what happens to us. Even something that seems dark and confounding can turn out to be an opportunity. Much of our teaching is about, and you may have heard this before, change your thinking, change your life. I think it goes without saying that our perception of how what is wrong and what is right or what is good or bad influences our lives a great deal. Anybody here ever listen to the news? How often is the news filled with negativity or what is wrong in the world? It's not very often focused on good news. But what if we took note of what we have actually been doing over the last few decades? For example, the proportion of people living with less than $2 a day has decreased by a factor of 2 since the late 90s. Did you know, for example, that 80% of the people in the world have access to some electricity? Or that the global access to safe drinking water has raised by 16% since the year 2000? What if we understood that universal intelligence can work for us, but only through us? Perhaps we would begin to accept more good today than we've accepted yesterday. What about sin? The original meaning of sin was simply to fall short or to miss the mark. A sin is not a thing, it is merely an activity that produces an undesirable effect in our lives. In other words, we are punished by our sins, but not for them. Cause and effect. What about evil? We do not deny the appearance of evil. However, we teach that evil does not exist as a force or a power in the world. That which we call evil is merely the obstruction or inversion of the only power acting, which is spirit. The obstruction of spirit's expression always occurs in the mind through the holding of false beliefs. According to religious science, the only presence in the universe is God, spirit, universal intelligence, which is always good. Evil is merely the way that we withhold our expression and experience of that good by accepting false beliefs into our minds. Since the only power acting anywhere is God, our belief in the devil is that it simply cannot exist as a force acting in opposition to God's expression through spirit. Therefore, we believe there is really no devil. There is only the manifestation of falsely held beliefs within our minds, which produces the appearance of some sinister, invisible force acting in our lives. What of heaven and hell? We believe that heaven and hell are states of mind. We experience heaven when we are in harmony with life. Hell is a state of mind that we experience when we do not understand why something unpleasant is happening to us. We can choose to create our own heaven or hell on earth. As part of my spiritual journey, I came across a wonderful, easy-to-read little book which has supported my life journey, and so I want to touch on the 4 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. The first agreement: be impeccable with your word. Speak with integrity. Say only what you mean. Avoid using the word to speak against yourself or to gossip about others. Use the power of your word in the direction of truth and love. To be impeccable means to take responsibility for yourself and to not participate in the blame game. Impeccability starts with you. When you are impeccable with yourself, this will reflect in your life and in your relationship with others. The second agreement: do not take anything personally. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say and do is a perception of them. When you are immune to the opinions and actions of others, you won't be the victim of needless suffering. If someone gets angry with us, it's because our belief system is challenging their belief system, and they are scared, and they feel a need to defend their point of view. Even if someone yells at you, gossips about you, harms you or yours, it's still not about you. Their actions and words are based on what they believe. The third agreement: don't make assumptions. Find the courage to ask questions and to express what you really want. Communicate with others as clearly as you can to avoid misunderstandings, sadness, and drama. With just practicing this one agreement, you can transform your life. When we make assumptions, it's because we believe we know what others are thinking and feeling. We believe we know their point of view. It's easy to forget that our own beliefs are just our point of view based on our belief system and personal experiences and have nothing to do with what others think or feel. The fourth agreement: always do your best. Your best is going to change from moment to moment. It will be different when you are healthy as opposed to when you are sick. Under any circumstance, simply do your best, and you will avoid self-judgment, self-abuse, and regret. When you are doing your best, this means you are enjoying the action or the activity of life without expecting a reward of any kind, whether it be money, recognition, or applause. The pleasure comes from doing what you like and in the end having fun. Take action. Practice forgiveness. Have patience with yourself. I invite you to challenge yourself by using your daily experience to look for and to see the good in all those experiences, no matter how they may appear in the moment. One of our founding principles is that of freedom, which is the birthright of each and every one of us. We are free to choose and to create our experience of life. So in closing, I would just want to share with you one of my favorite quotes from Rumi. Out beyond the ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about ideas, language, and even the phrase, each other, doesn't make any sense. Thank you.
What is wrong with the world today? Mr. Ahmed Kafafi from the Islamic Association. What is wrong with the world today?
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be back and to see everyone again. So a lot of the injustices and atrocities we're seeing in the world today, as many of us mentioned, are deeper or symptoms of deeper spiritual issues. In the Islamic tradition, we are warned about a spiritual disease known as wahm, which roughly means love of the worldly life and hatred of death. Essentially, it's having an unhealthy attachment to the material world and its pleasures, and hating the thought of meeting one's creator. In the Quran, Allah tells us but you prefer the life of this world, even though the hereafter is far better and more lasting. This is certainly mentioned in the earlier scriptures, the scriptures of Abraham and Moses. Muslims are advised to be oriented to the hereafter and to make our ultimate objective the attainment of paradise. Allah says in the Quran, "And hasten towards forgiveness from your Lord and a paradise as vast as the heavens and the earth, prepared for those mindful of Allah." If one does not believe in the existence of paradise or the concept of making sacrifices or being patient in order to achieve an eternal reward, then it becomes very difficult to cope with any type of hardship in their life or to accept when things do not go their way. Because they think that the only time they can be happy or successful is in the immediate moment, right? If I don't get what I want right now, then my life and my efforts will be in vain. But Islam tells us no. This life is supposed to be difficult for the believer, right? It's a test. But if we patiently endure and remain steadfast upon the truth, then God promises us paradise, right? So if we have this understanding that the afterlife is the end goal, right? Then you can, overcome any kind of tribulation that you face. Across much of the world today, the interests of the individual, rather than the welfare of society as a whole, has been made the highest priority. And when our personal happiness becomes our ultimate objective, this leads to immoral behavior. Allah tells us in the Quran, "By time, indeed, humankind is in loss, except for those who have believed and done righteous deeds and advised each other to truth and advised each other to patience." One of the most emphasized teachings in Islam is the enjoyment of good and forbidding evil. However, we see a great lack of this quality in the world today. Rather, the preferred approach has become to simply leave people alone and validate everything. However, we can see that this type of bystander mindset has allowed corruption to become widespread and even accepted. When we set moral standards based on people's whims and desires, instead of divine guidance, then it's guaranteed that we will go astray. And if we're not accountable to a divine being, then there is really no strong incentive or deterrence for people to act justly. Because human systems of reward and punishment are fallible and they're temporary, right? And they can also be manipulated or evaded. But if someone understands that one day they will face their Creator, in the Quran we're told about how whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. Right? And that every single one of our actions is recorded, right? So even if we manage to do something that goes unnoticed, right, we will have to answer for it when we meet God, right? So, this understanding helps keep us in check, and we would think twice before infringing upon the rights of others. Furthermore, a lot of people, whom I deal with in my role as a chaplain, suffer from mental health issues. And if you look at the mental health industry, and again, I'm not against, seeking professional treatment for mental health issues. That is important, and we should do that. However, I would say that the industry is not really equipped to properly deal with some of these issues. And this is because the focus has become on resorting to palliative measures, so only dealing with the symptoms, or medicating people in order to numb their feelings. But there isn't really any recognition of the soul and its importance, right? Because the soul can also suffer from diseases, and when it goes untreated, it can actually lead to very devastating consequences. And the reality is that the root cause of many people's distress is not understanding what their purpose is in life and feeling that their life lacks meaning. And we're often told just to, do whatever makes us happy, right? Or be okay with who you are. But this is actually, terrible advice, because we can justify almost any crime or any wrongdoing with this type of reasoning, right? That, this action makes me happy, right? So I'm just going to do it. It'll never cause us to reflect, to hold ourselves accountable for our shortcomings, or to make positive changes in our lives. We're programmed in such a way that we need to be connected with our Creator through worship in order for our hearts to feel content. And no amount of wealth or possession can give us that peace and tranquility. A lot of the problems we're seeing, and this has been mentioned several times, is that it has a lot to do with internal issues and perspectives. Like, for instance, our whole understanding of what it means to be, a quote-unquote good person, right? And what is required to be successful in life. And we often make the mistake of thinking about this in a secular manner. For example, we're usually taught that as long as you are law-abiding and nice to other people, then you know what? You're a great person. You have nothing to worry about, right? But this is actually a very low standard, right? And it's a very superficial way to look at it. In Islam, right, we do not believe that, we should certainly strive to be good people, right, and to treat other people well. Like, that's definitely important. But we believe that this alone is not sufficient to be successful in the afterlife. We believe that the criteria which God has set in order to be successful is to believe in Him and to live by His commands. Right? In Islam, we believe that any act, no matter how noble it is not accepted by Allah unless it is done with a correct intention and is in adherence with the teachings of the faith. And this is very logical, when you give it some thought. Imagine, for example, you're taking an academic course, right? At the beginning of the course, the instructor explains the course criteria and how you're going to be evaluated, right? And you have to achieve certain outcomes in order to pass the course. Now, let's say you don't do the assignments, you don't study or prepare for the exam, and you end up failing the examination. Right? Is the instructor going to pass you? Right? Probably not. Even if you were a really nice person and everyone loved you and you helped your classmates, right? What it boils down to is, did you fulfill the criteria? Right? And even if you told the instructor, well, I just put down whatever answers that I thought was correct, right? That's not going to fly. Right? To be successful, you have to meet the criteria of the one who is evaluating you, right? We believe that in order to be successful and to enter paradise, we have to meet the criteria that God has set for us. So there's a lot more, that I can say about this topic, and it's difficult to answer this question in only 10 minutes. But I hope that, I was able to give you a few beneficial points to think about. Thank you.
Thank you all for your insight. That was great for in 10 minutes. What is wrong with the world is a very difficult thing. Please, let's give a warm applause for it. I noticed some of you writing questions out. That's really great. We're going to provide paper and pencil next week so that you can put down your questions and then hand them in if you like. Also, it has been decided to add another session on after the 5 sessions, have a 6th session where you will be allowed to ask questions to our panelists. But now is the time also, when we do our refreshments, to ask your questions if you have them today. Our next session will be on what is the solution. We heard what was wrong with the world today. Well, next week we will find out what the solution is. I would like to end with this prayer. May the source of life enliven you. May the divine embrace encircle you. May the holy breath inspire you to love, compassion, and joy. Amen.
Thank you.
That was wonderful.